Hello, and welcome to the Health Go Live webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at 9am Health. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to Avantika Waring, Chief Medical Officer, 9am Health.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Avantika Waring. I am a practicing endocrinologist, and I am the Chief Medical Officer at 9am Health, and excited to have you all joining us today for this very important discussion. I'm going to turn it over to my amazing co-panelists. Next, Alyssa, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Johnson. I'm a pharmacist by training and the clinical strategy director at SmithRX.
And great to see everyone. I'm Byron Crow, also a physician and chief medical officer at Solera Health, a healthcare technology platform supporting the virtual health ecosystem.
And I'm Stephanie Blaukamp, VP of Marketing at 9am Health, and I'll be your moderator today. So feel free to put your questions in and we'll get to them at the end. Over to you, Avantika.
Thank you. So if you're joining us today, it's most likely because you're very aware of the important discussions that are happening around GLP-1s. Unfortunately, obesity rates do continue to rise. And as a medical community, I know, all of us on the call here are actually very, very excited to finally have drugs that are effective and safe to treat people who really need it. But like anything else in life, these drugs do come with a cost. And unfortunately, it can be quite steep, at sometimes over $1,000 a month for this particular class of drug. I know that employers are increasingly considering and also being asked to cover these drugs for their workforce. And today we're going to focus on some of the issues around the coverage and the pros and cons on balance of covering drugs like GLP-1s for your employees. On the one hand, we have cost, of course, formulary limitations, just the burden of prior authorization processes that are weighing heavily against the importance of medical access, member satisfaction, and of course, the desire to provide great health care for our employees. So today we're going to focus on sort of discussing some of the current levers that are being used to manage GLP-1 costs. We'll also talk about what's working and what's not, and we'll hopefully be able to offer you some expert strategies on how your organization can offer access to GLP-1s in a comfortable way. We'll discuss the impact of drug access on the member or employee experience, and finally, we'll walk you through a case study. So I'll kick it over to Byron to talk about some of the current approaches and challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Avantika. When we think about ways that the market has responded to this rise in a very high cost medicine that has a lot of objective benefit and is of great interest to millions of Americans, there's a few levers that folks have turned to. The most maybe blunt instrument is no coverage at all, saying, hey, these medicines are really expensive. We're choosing not to cover them at this time. The biggest downside of that is you don't get any of the benefits of these medicines that really can make a huge difference in people's lives. So no coverage is a very blunt instrument to manage cost. It comes with a lot of downsides. You're losing out on all the amazing efficacy of this medicine for your population. The next lever is prior authorization. We've all experienced prior authorization in some form or another in this industry. Prior authorization can work, but prior authorization there's a lot of friction. You're putting something in front of patients that keeps them from getting to what they're already trying to seek. And for a lot of people, for folks who you really want to be taking these medicines, prior authorization can be a hurdle that they can't overcome. So suddenly you narrow that funnel, but you've actually got a group of people who you really would like to be on this medicine who aren't getting the benefits. Not to mention the added administrative burden that comes with managing prior authorization for a really expansive set of drugs. Lifetime coverage limits. Lifetime coverage limits have been floated as an idea to say, hey, let's try and segment the amount of money that we're going to pay for this. But GLP-1s are a medicine that most people or many people are going to have to be on for a long time. So the folks who are actually benefiting over the long term, as soon as that lifetime coverage limit runs out, now they're right back where they started. You've lost all the benefit. And that doesn't address the upfront activation onto the medicine. And then finally, formulary management. So these are these medicines are subject to high cost shares. And in some recent data of patients who discontinued GLP-1s, over half actually did so due to cost sharing concerns. So certainly raising cost share can make people think about, do I really want to be on this medicine? It also makes people start and then stop. So each of these strategies can definitely control costs, but has its own impact on the member experience for sure, and on downstream clinical outcomes that are obviously important for population health approaches. Each one has a little bit of cost and benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of chime in a little bit on the idea of the coming on and off the medications. I mean, one of the things that we really focus on in endocrinology is making sure that when we get people on these medications, that they can sort of commit to staying on them, at least for the duration of time that they need them, because really coming on and off, it's not just sort of emotionally stressful to be on and off your medication, but it's actually pretty bad for your metabolic health to be gaining and losing weight. And whether that's because of a lifetime coverage limit or a change in employment or, the kind of cost associated with the drug, it's something that we really think about. I know, Alyssa, you've had a lot of experience in the pharmacy world, so would love to hear, if you have any thoughts as well on the idea of formularies and how that impacts access.
Yeah, definitely. Formularies are the list of drugs that pharmacy benefit managers cover. And so it says which drugs are covered and at which tier, which goes to Byron's point about the cost share. And so while these are managed by formulary lists by the PBMs, they are brand products currently, which means if they're on formulary, they're all going to look similar and likely be on tier 2, the brand formulary, which means a similar copay and everything across medications for the patients. And it really is pretty difficult for the providers, other than to see coverage, to see what is actually the lowest cost medication. These medications work very well, but there are differences in costs and discounts for them also. And so while formulary management is an option for which drugs are covered, it doesn't offer a whole lot else, especially to providers and members, about what's the lowest cost.
Well, it's a nice segue, Alyssa, to thinking about there's trade-offs with each approach. There's pros and cons, and different approaches make more sense to different people and organizations depending on how you think and how your organization is thinking about coverage for GLP-1s. And in putting together this talk, we reflected on our own experience, talking with plans, talking with employers, and thinking about the different perspectives that we've heard and distilling those down into 3 key personas. The first is a group we call obesity skeptics, really reluctant to cover high-cost solutions for obesity for a whole variety of reasons, but ultimately say, hey, we're really hesitant to provide coverage for these medicines right now. Then in the other end of the spectrum, we call this group the workplace protectors. They're prioritizing avoiding any employee friction with regard to these medicines. They really want to be able to open up access. However they can best do that, they're very open to hearing new strategies and trying to keep that member and employee experience really friction-free. And then the bulk of folks are somewhere in the middle, this budget-wary supporter where you're concerned about the high cost of these medicines, and that's very fair. They are expensive, but also recognize that there's a lot to be gained by treating obesity and the attendant cardiometabolic conditions that come with it with a very effective class of medications. And so we see this mix of folks across the board. And Alyssa, from your perspective, I'd love to hear a bit more about how you have seen this play out among your client mix.
With our employer groups, I would say there is broad curiosity across different industries and everything else, because the GLP-1s are in such high demand and so prevalent across social media and everything else. So a lot of people are asking about it, and it is a unique and new thing for HR leaders to hear these requests for specific drugs and whatnot, because it is so mainstream at this point. And so I would say most are curious. Many are obesity skeptics by default, because these drugs work fantastic diagnostic clinically, but previously not all the obesity drugs were as effective. So most don't cover the class. I would say 80 to 90%. And so if they choose to cover GLP-1s for weight loss, it is a choice. And that's where it gets us more so to the budgetary supporters and workplace protectors. I would say the workplace protectors are employers with really rich benefits and probably under 5% at this point, which leaves the rest in the budget-wary supporters where they realize this has broader impact in terms of comorbidities and clinical outcomes, but they want to do it in a reasonable way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to just point out is that whether, you're a patient, a clinician, an HR benefits leader, we're all seeing this same sort of social media kind of newspaper articles. So it's pretty hard not to kind of develop personal feelings about this topic too. And that's where, I think it's really important to look at all of the options and look at the data and the evidence and then come to kind of a good conclusion. But it's a very unique health situation. There's not too many other medications or conditions where people are so kind of personally aware of a certain drug in their day-to-day, or at least I've not seen that. I don't know if either of you have.
Yeah, totally agree. And with the differing viewpoints, we want to have different options as well so that the solutions can be customized for each of these different preferences. And so we want to go through some of those innovative options for the reason you all are joining us today. And so on the next slide, okay, thank you. So we'll go through these in more detail, and these are where things get more unique, and they are some terms that are used across the industry, but maybe are new to you or maybe are used a little more broadly. So with the Gold Card programs, this is a term that's broadly used where, like Byron was mentioning about these drugs require prior authorization. A Gold Card program would mean that from certain providers, they would go through at the pharmacy when the patient tries to fill the prescription, meaning there's not that abrasion or delay in filling a prescription from needing to have information submitted for the prior authorization. And this is unique, and it definitely requires collaborative partners. So organizations like ours can work across our transparent technology platforms where with 9AM Health, Solera, and SmithRX, we're able to share what are the lowest cost options and work together so that when providers like Avantika see someone who really does qualify clinically and it is a good fit for them to tolerate therapy for the GLP-1s, they know the lowest cost option can write the prescription and then it will go through at the pharmacy without a PA. And so that's what the Gold Card program is. It's relying on a nice pairing between transparent partners like SmithRX, where we can find the lowest cost option and share that with providers to really vet and make sure that the right folks are starting these medications who can truly benefit.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about, we have on the slide here, the 9AM Smart Step method. So probably many of you have heard the term step therapy, and I think it's often, has a really negative connotation because it does sort of suggest barriers and blockers. One of the things that we do in our program is really consider treatment options in a stepwise manner, but really focusing on sort of the evidence behind it and talking through with the patient or the member, why do we want to try other options first? So, we get this question often, right? Well, why would I want to try something else if I know or I read or I hear that a GLP-1 is more effective? Our team likes to remind folks that just like if you had knee pain, you wouldn't immediately sign up for surgery the next day. And if you think about weight loss outcomes, bariatric surgery is highly effective. You lose a ton of weight there. But that's also not something that we're pushing people into right away. So it is really an individual decision. So that's where we're coming to work with a prescribing team that understands the pros and cons of each medication type and really has expertise in the field of endocrinology and obesity medicine is important because that sets a foundation of trust. So when I say a foundation of trust, that means that patients or your employees are going to really believe that we know our content, we can work with you, look at your history, and figure out, is a generic or a low-cost option a better first step? And even when it comes to the GLP-1s, really explaining to folks that the outcomes we see in these drug trials that people are hearing about on TikTok or the New York Times, they're really driven by participants in a study who were actively engaged in a lifestyle program as well. So, what I always tell people is, look, if you're going to invest in a potentially lifelong commitment to take a weekly injection, I really want it to work very well for you. And the best way for us to get there is to make sure that we've got that foundation of eating and exercise behaviors in place first. So I think working with a team that understands that and has the ability to very kind of delicately and in a nuanced way discuss this with your employees and give them options for other medications. Again, GLP-1s are not for everyone. People do sometimes have side effects, and there may be other drugs that might kind of be a better fit for them, is very important. And then on top of that is sort of the clinical programs part. So I've talked about kind of the science behind it. But Byron, do you want to comment on the idea of creating custom clinical programs?
Yeah, it's like Avantika was talking about, there's this notion that many people have a big decision to make, and that decision is, do I want to take a weekly injection for potentially the rest of my life? And that's a non-trivial thing for us to talk about with our patients. I think the analogy with, it's like a surgery. It's you're committing down a path is very apt. And where I think we can change our thinking a bit in this landscape, it can be almost like a default way of thinking that, hey, the people have been inundated with marketing, and now they're all showing up to their doctor and they're demanding to get started on a medicine right away. And in actuality, people are quite reasonable, especially when it comes to their health, and they're reasonable and thoughtful. And part of the reason why so many people are seeking the medicine is not only because it does work, but they haven't been presented with the full suite of other options to try instead. And the medicine is, the GLP-1 is viewed as the alternative. This is the obvious next step, as opposed to saying, actually, there's many intermediate steps that you can take, just like there's intermediate steps before you go to get a surgery. And so custom clinical programs is a way of using technology to bring together multiple different types of programs in a comprehensive obesity management suite that can give individuals a different way of going about their weight loss journey. That obviously is rooted in lifestyle change, but it can also be wrapped around with other adjunctive services. So things like food delivery, things like mental health supports, musculoskeletal and physical health supports, even GI care. All of those are going to play into an obesity journey. And when you can design a clinical program that not only addresses the specific cardiometabolic piece, which is obviously important, but layers on these other options where people can actually make a different choice instead of being forced to choose between nothing or a GLP-1, it creates that opportunity for people to pursue a choice that actually is a better fit for them in the long run. And for sure, a group of those folks are going to, at the end, try a medicine, and that's okay. That's what we want. We just want to be able to enable that whole host of choices so we don't artificially create a binary decision between nothing or high cost, potentially lifelong medicine. Avantika, back to you.
Thank you. The other thing that one of the things that Byron's describing, sort of this comprehensive and integrated clinical program, I think we can't underplay the role of technology and the role that technology kind of serves in this as well. A lot of times I think we have programs that are really geared towards the prescribers and the clinicians and maybe the payers, but the beauty of having a program that's built for patients as well is that it allows patients to kind of follow with their progress. So we can update the patients along the way, whether it's, logistic things like, is your prescription covered? Do you have a copay? Are there other options? Where should you fill your prescription? Things like that. But even on the clinical side, just helping people to be sort of constantly made aware of the successes that they're experiencing. And also catching them when they're in moments where they're not progressing and saying, hey, you know, it looks like you might need a little bit more support, and using that technology to help us sort of always be there for the patient, not in sort of a over meddling kind of way, but really offering support as and when they need it is something that I find really, really gratifying about kind of deploying these types of programs in a virtual setting. So great. Well, I think next we're going to take you through a case study.
Yes, I will take it from here. Thanks, Avantika. So we wanted to present a case study. We're going to call this client Golden. They for sure are budget-wary supporters, like we talked about earlier with the personas. Some of the challenges that they came to us with, where they were concerned about the cost, of course, of GLP-1s for a weight management program. They really were getting the demand. Their employees wanted this coverage. Many of them were paying out of pocket for some less effective alternatives, so they know that was already happening. And the clinical team at Golden, they did value the GLP-1s, but they were really concerned about inappropriate use and kind of the pressure that would be put on them. So some of the goals that they came to us with is, first of all, they wanted to keep their members, employees happy. They really wanted to maintain those low costs. And one thing they were really concerned about was promoting long-term health. They didn't want to do the quick fixes that they knew some of the employees were somewhat searching for already. And so some of the solutions that we put in place for them is, first of all, we reviewed their claims and we replaced some of their high cost meds with generics or formulary options. So that immediately saved them money on some of their metabolic health spend. We developed a custom weight management program similar to what Avantika was talking about earlier with a Smart Step program, and that made it more appropriate for certain employees. We notified the employees that were already on GLP-1s or weight management medications that to be able to get their medications, they would need to join the program. And that way we could maintain that clarity of them who is getting the GLP-1s. We also implemented a comprehensive lifestyle program. So we really wanted to ensure that we kept the engagement up and kept the employees happy as they went through. And we provided education on GLP-1s. I mean, like Avantika said, there's so much in the news right now. A lot of it is not true. And so we really wanted to give them the information on what GLP-1s are, that they are normally a lifelong medication, and then also give them alternatives. The news doesn't talk about the alternatives. We want to be their source of education. And then finally, we did actually implement the Gold Card with this Golden client. And, really for that, like Alyssa was talking about earlier and Avantika, that allows 9am Health providers to streamline the medications and the care. And so those are some of the solutions that we put together for them. I think I'm going to throw it back to Avantika now so she can talk about some of the results and some of the next steps.
Thanks, Stephanie. So this is a great case because I think, you look at what happened, and of course, there are some GLP-1 prescriptions that are going to be new. So there's always going to be that sort of initial new cost when you're prescribing a medication that wasn't covered before. But I think so often in this space, we really think about the immediate cost that's incurred by paying for meds. And we're very kind of short-sighted, at least in the immediate moments when you see the bill, right? And not really thinking about what the even kind of medium-term savings could be. So I think as Stephanie pointed out, one of the things that we did to sort of generate some savings right away, so you're kind of like banking some so that you can actually spend it for the GLP-1s, is looking across the metabolic drug spend and even things like insulins. There's other drugs where, Alyssa and I work on this very closely. We can transition people to a formulary alternative or a generic, and immediately you get savings right there. And that's a good feeling, I think, for a client to say, oh, wow, okay, well, I know we're going to spend on GLP-1s, but look, we already just saved some before you even started with that, right? And then just thinking about the savings that you'll get when you make people healthier. So our results from a comprehensive program show an A1C reduction of over 2 points, a blood pressure reduction of 17.7 millimeters of mercury systolic, and up to a 14% weight loss over 9 to 12 months. And if you think about what this means in the medium to long term, the data shows that a 1-point A1C reduction can translate to a 2% reduction in healthcare costs, or even a 13% drop in diabetes-related costs. Same with blood pressure. If you drop that top number by 10 and the bottom number by 5, you're looking at potentially a 25% reduction in heart attacks. If you think about the cost per event of a heart attack, I mean, not only are you making people healthier and happier, but you are going to save money down the road. And finally, you know, we think about just BMI reduction, so just reducing weight kind of in and of itself. A 1-point BMI reduction has been shown to save about $750 per person per year, and that's actually starting after the first year. So you're going to start kind of recouping some of that benefit on a financial, in a financial sense pretty quickly. So what would we talk about for next steps? I mean, I think so much of what Stephanie described in this case with Golden is just knowing your population. So if you're able to get access to and review your clinical data and then partner, you know, with an expert team, really knowing what the rates of obesity are, what the rates of those conditions are, what are you already spending money on? Are you spending a lot of money on arthritis concerns or diabetes that's not controlled? And maybe that can kind of help inform your decision about which bucket you want to be in for the employer personas. And then thinking about a partner who can help you design that custom clinical program that can, of course, be built on the data that you have about your population. And then finally, when we have that data and we have the programs kind of in mind, then we can think about what levers are right for your employee population. Is it gold carding, or is it just the implementation of a more formal utilization management program? Or is what you really need a kind of comprehensive weight, health, and lifestyle program? And that's where, you know, partnering with a team that really has experience in this and is open to discussing all these different options is very helpful. So with that, I'll just turn it over to my two colleagues too, in case they have other thoughts on the case study or any other feedback.
And we can go into more about the ROI. It's interesting because this gets pretty complex pretty quick. There's the cost of the drugs, and most of you probably all see spend based on your pharmacy spend from one bucket and medical spend in the other bucket. And so this is a class that really goes across both, where you could see the change in spend if you decide to cover GLP-1s for weight loss. But then with all of these medical outcomes Avantika mentioned, that's where you'd see the reduced spend on the medical side as well. And so it is, again, another unique category that requires a lot more data and following to understand the true impact, both financially and clinically for your employees.
And I'll just add, as we think about, you know, there's a lot of folks on this call. Which one of these personas resonates most with you? Are you sitting there going, oh yeah, my organization, maybe yourself, I'm in the skeptics camp. I'm not so sure that this is the right thing for us right now. Or on the opposite, no, I want to be able to provide as many people access to these medicines with as many wraparound services as I can, and cost and spend is absolute cost and spend is less important for my organization, or somewhere in the middle, trying to strike the hard balance between those two things. And I hope that part of the takeaway from today is that there's many different levers that can help organizations tailor to exactly what they need. Get creative with some of the program design so that we're really using the most of our technology tools, using our best, highest value clinicians, and really figuring out how to meet the needs of patients while not, making this a financially sustainable endeavor for everybody.
So I think we actually have plenty of time for some questions. And Stephanie, you can tell me, it looks like there's a little icon in the corner, so I'm assuming we do have some questions already.
Yes, we do. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second so I can grab all of them. Okay, so the first question: why are we not holding the drug companies accountable for reducing the costs associated with obesity medicines? Great questions. We pay several times more than other countries for these medications.
I can take this one from a pharmacy insurance standpoint. And so there's a lot that goes into this in our country. And a lot of it is really hitting the headlines lately with the FTC investigations into pharmacy benefit managers and trying to understand why are drug prices so high. So you ask a great question, so much so that it's timely and the FTC is looking into it. And there are congressional hearings trying to understand what these big companies are doing. And so while the manufacturer makes the drug and prices the drug, there are a lot of different companies along the way that take some of that funding or don't pass all the savings along. And that's why for a lot of these drugs, you don't really know the real price. It could be one sticker price, but at the end of the day, for the employer group, it's a different price. But when you work with a company like SmithRX, we are a technology company with all that data available and show it to the clients along with passing through all those savings. And so while these drugs can have a lot of different prices, it's important to work with a partner who will show you the different prices and again, the different savings. So at the end of the day, you know your drug costs. And so that was a long-winded way to say there are a lot of hands in the pot that drive drug prices up in America. And a lot of it is related to different monopolies and things in healthcare that are a whole other presentation. And we do a lot of those specifically from SmithRX, but I don't want to take too much time because we have a lot of other more clinical questions as well.
Okay, the next one, this is also a good one. The narrative in society has been written in a way that these medications are often seen as easy solutions for weight loss, replacing a more comprehensive approach that includes sustainable lifestyle changes, including nutrition, exercise that prevents bone and muscle mass. Can we link coverage for these medications with a requirement for the patient to be included in a comprehensive program? And what would that do to the total cost of care? Avantika, that might be a good one for you.
Yeah, this is a perfect question because I think that's absolutely what should happen. Not just, I mean, I'll talk about the cost implications in a moment, but just thinking about from the patient perspective, it's just so important that they have all that support. And I know, even, I'm an endocrinologist, but in my practice, I don't have time to talk about how you should eat to minimize GLP-1 side effects, or which exercises should you do to maintain your muscle mass, and how do we even track that? So I think just from kind of the humane standpoint, this is really the way to go when you're prescribing a medication like this that is going to be potentially long-term. When it comes to requiring, I think that is something that we can do and we do right now, but it's almost like, I don't like to think of it as a requirement to it's not intended to be punitive. It's really intended to be supportive. Also, just to make sure that when people are on these drugs, they are typically spending a lot of cash out of their own pocket for the copay. So I want them to see the maximum benefit from the drug. And that's only going to happen if they can stay on it and continue with all the lifestyle change as well. I think we've seen a lot in the kind of the news about people dropping off medications after the first 6 months, either due to cost, but also due to side effects. And so I think, being able to identify people who are less likely to have side effects and really help those who might have more side effects kind of plan ahead is another way to just really keep things going in the right direction. So when we talk about the cost of that, of course, all that care is, you can imagine that would also incur costs. But if you think about the value you're getting for that cost, I think it's more important to think about the value as opposed to just the dollar number. So let's say you prescribe these drugs and you didn't prescribe the wraparound services. You might pay for the drug for 6 months, and then your employee drops off because they're having side effects or they're not seeing the results they want right away. So now you've spent 6 months on the drug, you're not going to see the clinical benefit from that drug. So any kind of even 1-2 year benefit that could be kind of gained is going to be lost. So, it's hard to say like what the total cost would be. I think that's something you could probably calculate on an individual basis, but I like to think about it more as value as opposed to just like how much have we spent.
Avantika, can I add one
Yeah,
piece to that?
of course.
From the standpoint of customizing a clinical program, when we think about this on the Solera side, there's most people who are at the point where they're thinking about pharmacotherapy for weight loss have tried diet and exercise. Most people. And we take this viewpoint, and I know many share this viewpoint, that we're just like Avantika said, it's not punitive. We're not trying to force someone down a certain path. It's present this option as a different and supportive adjunct. And many people have tried to diet and tried to exercise before. A smaller portion have tried a really well done structured program, supported by nutritionists, supported by all kinds of digital resources. Many people have done it DIY with a book. So having these and positioning these as supports and helpful ways for folks to get the best results and do things that we already know are good for our health. Even if you're not on a GLP-1, eating better, getting more exercise are all things that we know are good for us anyway and make us feel better. That's really where we can use these, build these supports into the clinical program design from the very beginning.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. The next question. Does insurance cover patients that go through the Gold Card program? Maybe we talk about what the Gold Card is again. And then where do you find programs such as SmithRX?
This is a great time to, reiterate the Gold Card concept. And so what this is it is through insurance, along with a partner of providers, where it is doing that work ahead of time. So the whole team is aligned on what's the lowest cost option, and the providers like Avantika can offer those wraparound services to see who truly needs to be on the therapies. And so this is an insurance-based program and done so that it automatically goes through at the pharmacy, because all of that work has been done ahead of time to make sure they're involved in the lifestyle modification programs, and then also the providers understanding what the lowest cost option is. And so with interest in SmithRX, we have a website, SmithRX.com. If you're an employer or a broker, we have different sections there for you to see what it takes to just get a quick repricer and see what it would look like for SmithRX to help manage the claims and offer innovative programs like this with other great partners.
Amazing. Thank you. Next question, are GLP-1s truly lifelong injections, or can patients stop taking the injections and make lifestyle changes just to maintain that weight loss? Maybe Avantika or Byron.
Byron, do you want to answer this one, or should I? We could probably tag team it.
I'll start, and then you get the last word as the endocrinologist. I'm a generalist, so I'll speak from the generalist perspective, where in the trials, a lot of folks regain weight very quickly when they stop these medicines, and I think what we're seeing is there is a group of people who can come off the medicine and maintain. Many people can't. Is it many people? Is it most? Is it the vast majority? Time will tell exactly what the percentages are, but right now the weight of the evidence points towards, for many, if not most people, this is a long-term medication.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we're still learning. These drugs are not new per se, because we've been using them for diabetes for, over 10 years. But thinking about when we were, using them for diabetes, we weren't pairing them with lifestyle change. Most of the people on the drugs, actually all of them, lived with diabetes, which also changes kind of your weight trajectory, because there's other medications involved and other kind of metabolic pathways at play. So it's really just something that we're still kind of learning about. But the data that we have to date, as Byron said, does suggest that you do need to continue the medication. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who have successfully come off the medication and have implemented real lifestyle changes and maintained, perhaps most of the weight. But it's like a drug for blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure and you treat your blood pressure, unless you do all the other things to reduce blood pressure, like, again, weight loss and dietary changes and all of that, stop smoking, it's probably, if you stop the medication, your blood pressure will come up again. So that's a conversation we'd like to have kind of on the individual basis with a person, to say, is this something we want to try and come off? And what's the risk benefit to you? You know, where were you before you started? Are we worried about an acute complication? We would never want to take someone off a medication that was keeping them from having a bad outcome. That being said, if we think they're in a different place now, the conversation could be really different. I also see there's several questions about references for our savings stats, and I realized they were not in the slide, but Stephanie, we do have all those references in our white paper, so
Yeah.
perhaps we can make that available or direct you all to that.
Yep, actually, when you guys get the recording, the white paper will be also in that email from the health team. And so you'll be able to download that and get all the stats that we've talked about and where the sources are. So stay tuned for that.
Yep.
And then I think our next question, yeah, that was more or less, okay, he removed it. Okay, cool. So this was a good one, actually. What role do you see the primary care in the future of obesity care and GLP-1s? Maybe this is a good one for Byron.
I was hoping you'd say that, Stephanie. I think this is a really interesting topic, and you know, I've had many conversations with many of my friends who are full-time primary care doctors, and the conversation surprised me. A lot of them are sitting there saying, I didn't go into primary care to become an obesity medicine specialist, but I feel like that's so many of my conversations these days. And when you think about primary care in America is super burdened. Access is really tough. It's tougher than it's ever been. And now there's this new demand on primary care providers' time for a class of medicines that they can use, but do require additional expertise to really understand the nuance. It's a broad field. Obesity medicine is a board certification. So it's a specialty area. We've asked primary care doctors to do more and more and more. Now we're asking them to do this. Not all of them signed up to be obesity medicine doctors, even though they know that it's important. What's the right path forward? And I think what we're going to see is a group of primary care doctors who really want to engage in this particular subspecialty area, going and getting board certified in obesity medicine. We're already seeing that. Way more folks have become board certified in obesity medicine. So they're self-identifying and saying, I want to have expertise in this. And then they'll be complemented by a whole suite of obesity medicine and endocrinology clinics that can say, hey, when you have a patient who's looking for this medicine, let us help you. And we'll have that same kind of specialist internist dynamic that we've had in many other situations. But Avantika, I'm curious on your point of view there from the specialist lens.
I mean, I would actually say that even, you know, in endocrinology was kind of the original obesity specialty because we deal in metabolism and we use GLP-1s. But even many endocrinologists are sort of like, this isn't what I thought I was, you know, going to be managing, which is why I think it's great that we have folks who are really dedicated specifically to obesity medicine. But, you know, it's just, I think when you ask like who should be managing kind of which populations and when you're thinking about the role, that can really just be dependent on the system that you have in place, what supports you have, and also kind of like what the interest and training of the individual clinician is. So I think there's also there's another question I saw as well about primary care that maybe we could actually link in. Do you mind if I read the questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Someone asked, considering the very high prevalence of obesity, are these specialized programs enough to create change at a population level, or do we need to look at how we implement such programs in existing primary care programs, acknowledging that providers there are already overwhelmed? In other words, do we do a lot for a few or a little for a large number of patients? So awesome question. But Byron, I think actually thinking about programs like these are not necessarily, you know, as kind of, I don't want to say labor intensive, but labor intensive as it might seem. So they are sort of intended to be kind of population programs, but I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I think it's a really great question. I think that the scope of these types of programs is going to rise to address the demand. And so we will be able to scale these programs to meet a population level need ultimately. That's going to take time. I wish it would happen overnight, but it's going to take time. But I think we're going to get there in the same way that if you think about other blockbuster classes of medicines in the last 30 years, things like statins, we've scaled access and expertise to address a population need. And now we have a whole generation of physicians, advanced practice providers, and others who are very skilled at managing those medicines at a population level. And I think we're going to see the same thing happen here.
Right. Okay, next question. This one's interesting too. Many states are no longer allowing step therapy, and how does this affect your solution?
This is actually, Alyssa, maybe, do you want to comment a little bit on kind of step therapy, requiring steps, not allowing steps? Because I don't know as much about the regulatory, but I can definitely speak to kind of how we address that.
Yeah, certainly. A lot of those regulations are around what needs to happen at the point of sale at the pharmacy when the prescription's being filled. And that is looking back to see if that patient has already filled the drug that's required. And so there are varying regulations across state by state for that. But getting back to where this is a broader, more innovative solution with the wraparound program, that's where I was going to go back to you, Avantika, to say, because it's not something we're checking in our files for, it's something you evaluate as a clinician. So rather than us seeing claims data, expert clinicians are walking patients through the step.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was going to say. I mean, it's not, the idea of, so just to give a little background, before coming to 9am Health, I worked in an integrated health system where we had a similar, I mean, it was never called gold carding, but the idea was that you knew your formulary, you knew the cost implications for the member, and therefore you kind of prescribed in alignment with the clinical best practice and also just with an eye on cost. And that's kind of how I think of gold carding as working. It's really putting the trust and also responsibility on your prescribing partner group to say, this is the right next step for you. It's not that we require, again, we don't require A to get to B to get to C. It's more about, have you tried the appropriate medication first? And is this now the most appropriate medication for you? I know there's a lot of like back and forth about things like GLP-1s, even in diabetes, but at the end of the day, most of the trials that have shown the benefit of those drugs are done in people who are on metformin already, because that was always the first kind of drug that we were supposed to use. So it's hard to extrapolate away from that. And so I think it's more like, do we want to say that people have to try, let's say a SGLT2, a different class of diabetes drug before they move to a GLP-1? Or do we want to say, hey, clinician, think about this specific patient, think about the data. What is the actual appropriate drug for this person to be on, like right now? And so that's where, we don't get around the step therapy. We're not avoiding it. We're not subscribing to it. We're really just practicing in a way that's clinically sensible.
And I think that's a really important point, Avantika, that from a clinician standpoint, when someone comes to you, it's not step therapy to just present the options stepwise. Hey, start here, and then if based on that, try this, and then maybe try this. That's just good clinical medicine. And people can understand that and be receptive to that message because they have a choice. They're not being forced to go down a certain pathway. And I think that's an important nuance. Step therapy from a state regulation standpoint, we're saying you have to do this before you do this. You have to do A before B, as opposed to just having an honest conversation. Hey, you have A or B available to you. We think A is the right place to start, and then letting someone make an informed choice. And many people are going to make the choice to try something before they go any further, just like we do in clinic every day.
Great, thank you. Next question, this is good too. How can I work with my PBM for prior auth integration? My company uses CVS and we're trying to figure out how to reduce the member abrasion on prior auth. Maybe you, Alyssa.
An Alyssa question, yeah.
It is a great question. There are different types of PBMs, and the legacy PBMs, like what you mentioned, are more strict in how they manage these, and it's much more difficult to customize a modern PBM that's transparent and pass through and more innovative, like SmithRX, and there are a handful of others out there, can offer other options that are more customized. So I would say in that legacy model, it's pretty difficult unless you find another vendor that would function outside the PBM. And there are other cost containment options as well, but it would more like be a wraparound or a carve out. And I don't know if you want to expand on anything you all are doing, Avantika.
I don't think I have enough kind of
Yeah.
knowledge of that, those kind of rules to comment on that, but specifically.
Yeah, so a lot of those programs end up being an employer doing reimbursement where maybe the drugs are going through a program like 9am Health and filled at one of their approved pharmacies or through one of their pharmacy partners or programs and then reimbursed to the member. And so it's much more creative, burdensome, and very different than the standard process, I would say. So there are solutions to run it off the plan if you find the right partners.
Perfect segue to the next question. What types of providers are available to my employees through these types of solutions with Solera, 9am Health, or SmithRX? Avantika, you want to maybe take that?
Sure, yeah. So on the 9am Health side, we have a whole suite of different metabolic care providers. So we have registered dietitians, nutritionists, we have health coaches, clinical pharmacists, patient care advocates who are sort of helping navigate all of these kind of insurance questions, prescriptions, getting people from point A to point B. And then we have nurse practitioners, physicians, and that includes specialty physicians in obesity medicine, endocrinology, and lipidology. So basically anyone you could potentially need to see to manage any of your cardiometabolic conditions, you'll have access to through our platform. So Byron, I'll turn it over to you on the Solera side.
Well, on the Solera side, we're a technology platform. So we exist to bring together all the different virtual care network partners in this ecosystem. 9am is our virtual obesity medicine clinic that we work with for the clinical side of this. And then on the platform, we can bring together a whole host of other network capabilities. So starting with our core weight management network, which is a group of evidence-based lifestyle change programs that members can choose between to find the best fit program for them. So you have that lifestyle component. And then in the future, bringing in adjunctive services. So things like musculoskeletal care, mental health supports. We talked about food delivery, GI supports, and others. The platform brings together all those in one place in a very configurable way and allows for that data exchange between all those parties. So you always know where somebody is on their care journey.
Awesome. And this is also another good segue. And maybe Byron, you might want to continue this. How do you foresee virtual care solutions impacting the way the industry approaches obesity care in the future?
I think, I'll take this question even to one level higher. It's a great question. How is virtual care going to impact the way we all get care across conditions in the future? And I think the last decade we've seen virtual care grow and mature into something from, very nascent, right? A handful of solutions. Many at the beginning didn't even have clinicians involved, to now really sophisticated, purpose-built virtual care that patients really love. I think in the next decade, we're going to see an expansion of those types of clinics and folks using them a lot more to get a lot more care just in general. And healthcare is going to become more like other parts of our life that we manage digitally. I always ask, when was the last time you went into a bank? Right? It's been a while since you had to go into the bank and cash a check, but we're still going into our doctor's office. I think we're seeing a shift where virtual care is becoming much more sophisticated, much more capable, and patients really like it and are going to use it a lot more. So I think it's only going to become more important in our ecosystem, both generally and especially for obesity medicine.
Awesome. Thank you. So another question here, for the population of patients who their initial prior auth for like a GLP-1 is denied, what is the best course of action? We at 9AM Health deal with this all day long, so this is probably one for Advantica. So what are the better choices? Appeal their denial first, recommend a lower tier GLP-1 drug. Essentially, does appealing the denied prior auth for the GLP-1 provide a net benefit to patients, employers, insurers over time? Yeah.
That is a really complicated question. I feel like Alyssa could probably help me with this as
Okay.
well. No, it's a good question. I mean, gosh, it's such a funny system, right? You request something and then you're told you can't have it, and then you ask again and you ask with different, please. So it is super burdensome. I think, Alyssa, you kind of alluded to this earlier too. I think my recommendation would be to always try, if you can, from the beginning, work with the member in light of understanding what their coverage is likely to be. Because I can at least tell you my experience sitting in the doctor's office, when you prescribe someone for something and you get them really hyped about it, and then they find out it's not covered, it's very disappointing. And then of course, from the patient perspective, they're going to say, well, my doctor said I needed this, and you're saying I can't have it. And you're creating like really a butting of heads here. So actually that is, well, I could roll this back into kind of our solutions in the sense that we already know ahead of time. So as your prescribing team at 9AM Health, we already know, do you have a benefit that includes weight loss medications? If so, what are the requirements for that? And what do you have to, which clinical criteria do you need to meet? Which is a drug that's most likely to be covered? So we can walk you through the options, this sort of platter of options for how we're going to create a care plan for you, kind of knowing ahead of time what the outcome will be. And then there's, gold carding on our side. So we know that if we truly feel that this is the right decision, that it will go through and we won't have us back and forth. I know that doesn't solve, your specific question, which is, about a standard scenario that we see often in clinical practice, but I think it really just calls to light again the issue that we have with just managing utilization when there's very little connection between the people writing the prescriptions and the people kind of making the rules around what's covered and what's not. So I'll leave it at that, I guess.
That was a great answer. That's where I thought you might go. I do want to get to this one because I think it's really interesting. We just got 2 minutes left here. So is it possible to bill the obesity care from 9AM Health through our claims, or is this something we'd have to bill through the solution directly? Vantika.
I can answer this. So the answer is yes and yes. We've done things different ways based on the specific need of the client and also, the arrangements they have with their health plan. So if you're curious about options, I would say just, reach out and come talk to us, because we can kind of investigate what your current state of affairs is and help you come up with a way to bill that flexibly meets your needs. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And to those that we didn't get a chance to answer, we will still try to answer you if you are not anonymous, and we can send a reply to you. But thank you everyone for joining us. This was very amazing. Byron, Avantika, Alyssa, thank you for your expert opinions and all the info that you shared. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you to 9AM Health and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at community.hlth.com to catch up on all Health Go Live webinars. And join us in Las Vegas, October 20th through 23rd for Health 2024.